It was daytime and right in front of the Golden Ring Island, something happened and the waves began to form a strange pattern in the ocean. Not long after, the water started to concentrate at a single point, creating a marine whirlpool. This strange event caused the fish and crabs that inhabited the area to come ashore, and many of them lost their lives. Just then, someone whose body was surrounded by golden martial energy elegantly emerged from the marine whirlpool. Upon feeling this, the attention of the martial Saint Harold and his men turned toward the body, causing their jaws and eyes to widen in surprise and confusion. They were all in shock, not knowing what was happening. It was our boy, Liu Sheng. Using his power, he began to create small golden steps and slowly started walking toward the island. They were in shock upon seeing that he had emerged from the sea whirlpool. Harold and his men quickly knelt before Liu Sheng, joined their hands, closed their eyes, and with a respectful demeanor welcomed the martial saint. Harold's eyes were full of fear. While sweating profusely, he realized that Liu Sheng had become stronger. He remembered that Liu Sheng had said he was a level 8 warrior, but it was obvious that he did not have the power of a level 8. If he was a level 8 warrior, then Harold was determined to cut off his own head and join the martial saints of the Dark Star. Using the golden steps, Liu Sheng reached the Golden Ring Island and began to observe Harold in silence. The attention of martial Saint Harold was fixed on him. He thought about the guides and was sure that our boy was at the same level as the guides, and even if he wasn't far from being so. Liu Sheng softly landed on the ground and, with a calm expression, asked if Harold and the others were ready. Harold lowered his head before him as a sign of respect. Liu Sheng's attention was fixed on them, and his eyes widened in surprise because this was very strange to him. He remembered that Harold's experts had died and many had been seriously injured during the attack by Dark Star and the Black Magic Society. He was confused because he did not know how so many experts had appeared again in such a short time. Thinking calmly, it did not take him long to realize that Harold had merged the experts from Dark Star and the Black Magic Society. Harold stood up, extended his hand, and with a pleasant expression mentioned that they were ready to leave at any moment. Liu Sheng looked away, and with a serene gaze said that there was no more time to lose. They boarded a private plane. Harold, who was sitting in the seat next to Liu Sheng, began to observe our boy in silence. Liu Sheng took out an energy crystal, and his attention was fixed on it. He could not help but sink into his thoughts since energy crystals held many secrets. Liu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise. He brought the energy crystal closer and explained that the energy crystals Harold had given him had been completely absorbed by his body, and now his immortal cells had risen to more than 278. For him, their effect was truly incredible, and it was no wonder that even the strongest of advanced civilizations harvested them as stellar-level resources. Our boy's body began to emit a powerful martial energy. Feeling this, Harold's eyes widened in fear and surprise, making him sweat. His gaze fixed on Liu Sheng's body. Realizing that sitting next to him was like being under the sun while sitting beside a barbecue furnace. Liu Sheng's energy started expanding throughout the plane. Harold closed his eyes and concentrated, realizing that it wasn't just heat but a burning sensation. Every time Liu Sheng breathed, it was as if his body expelled lava. While he was distracted, Liu Sheng clenched his fist, turned towards him, and with a confident gaze caught his attention and asked if he believed that with a single punch he would be able to defeat a martial saint. Upon hearing this, Harold snapped out of his thoughts, and his eyes widened in fear. He couldn't help but swallow hard and feel chills all over his body. He quickly clasped his hands together and bowed his head before our boy, and with a respectful demeanor, revealed that he had a portion of the energy crystals he had collected from Dark Star and the Black Magic Society, promising that he would hand them over to him immediately. With his eyes full of tears, Harold took out a bag full of energy crystals and handed it to Liu Sheng. Our boy's attention was fixed on the bag, and his eyes began to shine with confusion. He didn't know what was happening. If he said that this was not really his intention, Harold would not believe him. Liu Sheng took the bag of energy crystals, and his attention focused on it, making his eyes fill with joy and a smile spread across his face, adding to what he had before. Liu Sheng now had more than a kilogram of energy crystals, admitting that Harold had many resources and money. Liu Sheng tossed the bag into the air and couldn't help but smile. Harold rested his head on his hand and couldn't help but sigh. This moment reminded him of an old saying from the Dragon Kingdom: accompanying a king was like accompanying a wild tiger. Back then, he didn't understand it very well. But now he fully comprehended it. Liu Sheng turned towards him and began to show a grateful smile, but Harold started to see death itself in our boy's aura for him. Being next to someone who at any moment could decide his life or death was truly like being accompanied by death itself, something terrifying. Liu Sheng rested his hands on the arms of the seat, and his eyes began to shine with hatred, making the energy emerging from his body grow more intense. Because his power had increased too quickly, he still had not mastered many aspects of controlling it properly. To get used to this power, many battles and high-intensity combats were necessary. He began to imagine himself kissing Snowy, something he couldn't do now since he would end up burning her mouth. He began to imagine himself with his arms crossed, next to his charred parents. If he spent too much time with his family, they would end up charred. Liu Sheng's gaze expanded with determination. He placed his hand on his chest. He needed pressure. The last time the guides had taken account, there were 24 level 9 martial saints on the blue planet. Now that 3 had died and some were injured, adding Harold, only 20 remained. He began to imagine all the powerful martial saints of the planet staring at him intently. He didn't know if the 20 martial saints would be able to put pressure on him. If 2 couldn't pressure him, he planned to face 20 or even 30. Liu Sheng turned his head towards the airplane window and with a serious gaze began to observe the landscape. If fighting against all the martial saints was not enough, then there would be no other option but to fight against the so-called guides. The airplane was flying at high speed. And it was already midday. Half an hour later, they arrived at an island, and on top of the mountains, there was a castle. Once the airplane landed, Liu Sheng stepped out. And his attention was fixed on the castle. Harold, who was standing behind him, extended his hands and explained that this place was called the Island of the Thousand Sages, which had been named by the World Martial Arts Association. Liu Sheng's eyes widened with joy, and a confident smile appeared on his face. Seeing that the island was called the Island of the Thousand Sages, he could not deny that the martial saints of the blue planet had rather grand aspirations. Then, he asked Harold what was next. Harold closed his eyes and put his hand inside his suit, explaining that before the start of the tournament, there was a party mainly for martial arts masters to exchange ideas and resources. Additionally, they could take advantage of the occasion to submit to the World Martial Arts Association a list of items they wished to trade. Liu Sheng became curious and began listening to Harold in silence. The martial saint Harold took out a list and asked our boy to take a look at it. Liu Sheng took the list, and his eyes widened in surprise. On the list, there was information about life nutrient liquid number 3, which had a certain nourishing effect on the martial soul and could strengthen the manifestation of the dharma. The price was 2 kilograms of energy crystals per unit. There was also tempered life liquid number 3, which had a certain refining effect on the martial body and could strengthen it. It had the same price as the nutrient liquid, 2 kilograms of energy crystals per unit. While holding the list with one hand, Liu Sheng turned to Harold and, with a curious expression, mentioned that all available items for exchange were designed for martial saints. The lowest price was at least 1 kilogram of energy crystals. He realized that things hadn't gone well for Harold as a level 9 martial saint since he hadn't been able to save even 1 kilogram in over 100 years. Upon hearing this, Harold's eyes began to shine with embarrassment. He panicked and, with a forced smile, explained that the reason was that he had already exchanged some things before. So now he didn't have much wealth on hand. However, several martial saints with whom he had a good relationship still owed him quite a few energy crystals, promising that once he collected them, he would hand them over to Liu Sheng. A smile spread across our boy's face since he couldn't believe that the old fox Harold had an ace up his sleeve. Something caught our boy's attention, making him curious. His gaze fixed on the list, where there was also an item called Level 10 Will Protection Talisman. It contained the will of a level 10 expert and could be activated at will. But its exchange price was 30 kilograms of energy crystals per unit. Liu Sheng remembered when that bastard Zhao Ji spat out A talisman while on the brink of death. He grabbed the list again, and his eyes widened in surprise, realizing that Zhao Ji had paid 30 kilograms for the talisman. He began to imagine Martial Saint Zhao Ji smiling and making various rare items float. After being the human god of the Dragon Kingdom for more than 100 years, his wealth was not something that a mere organization leader like Harold could match. And it was very likely that he had also kept the inheritance of many martial saints who had fallen in battle during the war between the Dragon and Lion kingdoms. Liu Sheng's eyes widened with hatred. He knew that these things were surely only meant to deceive martial saints from remote villages. He started imagining the guides with items hanging from their fingers. He, better than anyone else, knew that guides took leftovers from their civilizations, things they no longer used, to give them to martial saints. And in this way, they managed to make them sell their souls for the items. First, the guides impoverished them by 90%, then they exchanged trash with them. And finally, they took 10% of the energy crystals, making it a perfect business. Liu Sheng began walking toward the castle and threw the list into the air. Knowing that only by leaving the blue star and setting foot in the vast universe could one understand how immense and magnificent it truly was. Only then would they be able to stand on equal footing with true martial artists. A few hours later, the party began, and somewhere in the castle was the dressing room. Inside was Liu Sheng, who was getting dressed in front of a mirror. He started adjusting his tie and couldn't help but smile, not knowing if the guests would be able to recognize him if he stood before everyone. Harold, who was behind, extended his hands and with a smile mentioned that Liu Sheng's disguise was perfect, and although his appearance had changed, he still dazzled like a deity, radiant and perfect. With a serious expression, Liu Sheng explained that even if Harold made his adulation sound like flattery, he would still have to hand over every last gram of energy crystals he owed. Harold placed his hand on his chest, closed his eyes, and with a smile promised to do so and decided to go ahead. The guests began to enjoy the party, some drinking alcohol and others conversing among themselves. Liu Sheng came out of the dressing room and started walking through the hall, his attention fixed on the others. Everyone here had at least a grandmaster level, not only standing out in power, but also in appearance, realizing that this was truly a gathering of the planet's elite. Nothing like the boring birthday celebration of the Chen family. Among those at the party were Dong Shenhe and Lin Wanwen talking to each other. As Liu Sheng passed nearby, his gaze fixed on them. Seeing his brother-in-law's spirit, he noticed that he had resumed his martial path. Dong Shenhe had shaved his hair. With a kind smile, he began to converse with Lin Wanwen. Seeing this, Liu Sheng couldn't help but smile. He didn't know if this was a symbol of starting from scratch. Liu Sheng started walking through the hall and began looking at all the guests. He wanted to see if there were any other old acquaintances. Just then, something caught Liu Sheng's attention, making him stop and turn to the side. At the party were also the marshals of the army, who were chatting among themselves with a smile. Liu Sheng began observing them and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused upon seeing that even the army of the Dragon Kingdom was here. Although they did not have their own martial saint, they had still come to fight for Tan Zhongyu and Lin Zhengyu's interests, and had even brought their most precious treasure, the old yet unbreakable sword. He was curious without knowing whether he should approach them. Just then, a portal opened in front of everyone. Seeing this, they couldn't help but feel joyful and excited. Everyone clenched their fists because Miss Flona, the flower of the alliance, had arrived. Liu Sheng's gaze fixed on the portal, and his eyes widened in surprise. A beautiful woman with long hair emerged from the portal and began walking through the hall, causing all the men to start cheering for her. Liu Sheng was mesmerized as he watched Flona. To him, a fairy tale princess would not be more dazzling than her, and her genetics were exceptionally perfect, far above ordinary. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,